This content is about opportunity recognition, right? Opportunity identification, actually. And a couple topics right off the top. First of all, in previous years, I would always take a Harvard case, or I would take a case that I'm aware of or something, and I would present the case, like an example of somebody else that has done something entrepreneurial. And we would use that as a framework, and you can kind of see a pattern between what that person did and maybe what you would like to do. This time, I'm not doing any cases. And instead, what I'd like to do is I'd just like to share my point of view on these topics with you. Just how I think about how you get opportunities. And certainly I'm aware of a lot of cases. And I'm probably influenced by the cases and by real people who started companies. But I'd like to try to tell you, of all the ones that I've seen, which ones do I think actually work? Which ones have I seen actually turn into ventures, and why do they turn into ventures? So that's what I'm going to try to tell you. And it's going to be both applicable to entrepreneurship as well as corporate innovation. I think these ideas, they're different spaces, but if you happen to be at a company one day in the future, some of these ideas are still applicable. I'll just make that point. And I'm trying to make this as practical and usable as possible, right? So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I broken it into two pieces, one for today and one for tomorrow. Today, I want to talk to you about how do you get an idea, right? And like what's the starting point? Tomorrow, I want to talk to you about what it means to execute, all right? So once you have your idea, people say, oh, it all comes down to execution. What exactly does that mean? So that's the way I divided these two. So now, let's start with, I want to talk to you a little bit about what is an opportunity. And so follow this kind of just parallel for a second. You could say if you get a new job, that's an opportunity too, right? I mean, certainly an opportunity starting a company, but like a really simple idea is that you go and you get a job. What are the elements that created that opportunity? One is that you had some basic skills. And where do you get those skills? It's probably today, it's because you took some class, you did some project. There was something that you knew, some skills that you had, and the world at the same time changed. There was some change going on in the world, and because of that change, a new job was opened that you could apply to. And if there was a match between what changed in the world causing this need and the skills that you had, if that's a match, people say, oh, I don't think you're a good match for this job. But sometimes they say, oh, you're a perfect fit. If it's a match, then that's an opportunity. That's how you get a job, right? It's not that complicated. And once you have that first job, what happens? What happens is then, while you're in that job, then you develop some new skills. You develop some understanding of an industry. And sometimes you have a great success, and sometimes you have a failure, even in the job. And when it's a failure, first I want to say this. Success is always better than failure. Okay? Like you hear all the time, failure is great. We have a party because we failed. Okay, let me reinterpret that for you. Okay? If I have to choose between having a success and having a failure, I'm going to take having a success right off the top. Okay? When you interview for the next job, how did the last job go? Oh, it was a disaster. Okay, that's not really like the perfect stepping stone for the next job. All right? And how was your last company? Oh, we cratered it. We lost like $50 million. That's not really like a good story for the next one. But, okay, so if you have a success, that's great. But if you have a failure, you don't have to look at it like a failure. And that's the point. When it doesn't go as well, you can either say, well, I must be like a terrible entrepreneur because I'm not like a great person because it wasn't a success. Or you can say, that was a learning opportunity. And what could I salvage out of the failure? Well, what you can salvage is you still learn things along the way. And sometimes you can use what you learned along with new things that have changed in the environment. But my point is, you learn something, and then you can get another job because now you've learned something new and the world has changed, and you can get like a bigger job. Maybe that bigger job is like the CEO, when you follow this path, and maybe you're the CEO of some gigantic company. First point is, you can't go directly from here to here. You have to first do this and try this, and what you learn here gets you to the next one, right? It's like, so you can't just wait for the perfect job to come along. You have to start with something, and then that's where you learn the skills, and that matches with how the world is changing, and then you go on to the next thing. Okay, the same thing is true with ventures. So ventures are all made with the world is changing and you have a background. If you can come up with a way that these two fit together, then, and if you're best positioned to do that, you can create a venture. And then the next step is you can take that, whether it was a success or a failure, and you can match that with other things that are changing in the world, and you can you can work on your next opportunity. And generally, you can take on bigger and bigger opportunities as you get more and more experience, and you become more and more credible based on the past things that you did. So if you're waiting to start Google because this is like hugely a great thing, I'm going to say you don't have to do that. In fact, it's counterproductive to you. What you want to do is find something that's a match, use that as a learning experience, and then use that to be more credible and have done more things and take on a bigger opportunity. All right? So this is the basis of how I think of opportunities. Okay? So now, let me add just a little bit more detail to that. All ventures actually don't start just from your background and your skills. When they come together, instead of a job interview, what you have is a story. A story is developed. Okay? And the story is the thing that you can tell different people so that you can get more people to join you. Because the difference between a job and a venture is a job is something one person can do. A venture is something that you need 10 people or 20 people or 50 people to do, right? So you got to match, but now you got to get other people to be part of it. And so you use the story and you tell it to a lot of people, you show them a prototype, you validate, you go through that normal learning cycle. The goal is to collect stakeholders, and that turns into mind share and traction, but it also turns into a broad awareness. People become aware of what you're trying to do, and then the root of that story eventually becomes the company story, the story of momentum, the story of how the company got bigger, and then eventually that story becomes the brand. When you think of what's the brand of any company, that brand started off way back. It started off at the root of it was a story about where the company, what the company was. And so let me start with that. Just this idea that you take those two things, you build a story, and from there we're going to build the rest of the company. Now, I want to tell you that there's a lot of people who, it's one thing for me to say, I think stories are really where companies start, but you should know there's a lot of very successful entrepreneurs, incredibly successful entrepreneurs, who also agree with this idea, okay? And so I'm going to play this video clip for you. You can see it's Jack Dorsey, co-founder of Twitter and Square. And he's basically talking about where ideas come from. And it's got kind of the same theme to it. So just listen to this for 3 minutes, and we'll come back to our discussion. If I can, there we go.
The biggest thing for me on that path is I need to I need to draw something out, and I need to get it out of my head. I found myself very early on thinking about something, like, thinking about this early idea for Twitter, and saying to myself, I could build this awesome, you have those like shower moments where you're walking at midnight in some town in New York City, and you've got these amazing brand ideas, and then you start thinking, well, I could really start doing this if only X, and if I had this person, or if this technology existed, or if this happened, or this happened. And what I realized I was doing is I constantly making excuses for not working on it. And then the window had passed, and then I couldn't do anything. So I think it's really, really important to write it out, or to draw it out, or to code it. But you need to get it out of your head. And the reason you have to get it out of your head is you need to be able to see it on a surface that is not in your mind. And once you can see it, once you can step back from it, then you can also decide, this passes my filter, passes my constraints, so maybe I can share it with some other people. And then they'll be like, that's the stupidest idea ever, or that's somewhat interesting, but maybe this and this and this. So the sooner you can do that, then you have a lot of momentum around it, and you can really decide if you want to commit to it and work on it more, or put it on the shelf for a later date. And the realization that I think everyone needs to have about that latter option, putting it on the shelf, is that you can come back to it. And it'll surface back up in another piece of work or another idea at some point in your life. So, having that ability to close off a chapter and move on is really, really important. You can't have all these open threads, and that's what I realized I was doing. And that also encouraged me to really write more, and to really think about, what is the story? How are people coming to this? And like when I show my friends this, how are they going to react? And I would write it down. I would actually treat it like a play. And when I realized that I was writing plays, I read a lot more plays for style and for substance and for technique. And I think it's really good. And I think there's another company that I've always looked towards for inspiration, and I know a number of people in this room probably have this similar company in mind, which is Apple. Apple, I think, is run like a theater company. It has a great sense of pacing, has a great sense of story, and has a great sense of execution, and it's all event-driven. It's all stage-driven. The stage being a billboard, or the stage being a keynote, or the stage being a product launch. All of it has a very, very cohesive end-to-end story. When you think about what happened when Steve Jobs came back to the company, the first thing he did is he killed every product line the company was working on. And for 2 years, they had no product on the market whatsoever. All they had were a bunch of posters all around the world with Steve's heroes. And it said, think different. And it was just focused on bringing up the brand and making people aware of the brand again, and how the brand is aligning to this particular feeling and story. And then they came out with the iMac, and then built iTunes, and then the iPod, and they realized that, wait a minute, people are carrying music on their phones now, so we better build a phone, an iPhone. And so this unfolding of the plot and the epic story has been very, very interesting to watch, especially if you look back to that time when he came back to the company. So I've learned a lot from that company and other companies who operate in a similar fashion.
Okay. All right. So basically, I want to just reinforce this point. There's a story. You figure out how to tell it right. Then you use it to get other people to basically buy in, to help. You're growing the set of people. So if you agree with this, if you agree with Jack Dorsey and you agree with me and so many entrepreneurs that the story is the beginning, then let's. And there's a lot of other people, Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen talk about this idea, and John Bergstone, who used to teach courses here in CET, many years ago. It's a very consistent idea that these things start with stories. So if you're going to write a story, let's suppose you're hired at, like in a movie studio in Hollywood, and someone says, write a story. go ahead. Write a screenplay. Write a movie for us. How do you do that? I mean, and it's kind of, I mean, it's a little bit like start a company. It's like, in this case, write a story. What would you do? Where do you get your inspiration? How do you do it? I'll take a volunteer answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Figure out what you want to say.
Figure out what you want to say. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Life experiences?
Go to your own life experiences, right? Something about your background. I got one more. I'll take one more.
Figure out your audience.
Figure out who you want to target. All right. That sounds like, so those are all great answers. And I think they are kind of, they're kind of theoretical answers is maybe a way that I would think about it is, you know, you can figure out your market, you can think about what your background is, I mean, you can find a problem, you can see how these are related to starting a company. Here's how these guys say that you should do it. If you want to write a story, you just come to the realization that people have written stories already, okay? And so what you do is you take a story or two that you're aware of, and you see if there are some intersections between some stories that already exist. So you don't have to actually start writing the story from scratch. I'll give you a couple examples here. So maybe you've seen a lot of Westerns, and you've started to notice a whole bunch of space movies. Well, use those two as your high-level idea of the intersection. And I don't know if you've seen Star Wars. I assume you have. But if you think about it a little bit carefully, you would realize that Star Wars is basically a cowboy Western movie, but in space, right? It's got the same ideas in it. And if, you know, and then how many of you are aware of or have seen Jaws? Okay, you're at least aware of Jaws, right? There's a shark that's circling around a boat, and eventually you're going to get eaten. If you did that in space, it wouldn't be a shark. Maybe it would be an alien, right? You get the idea. You can take two movies that you're kind of aware of already, and take the intersection and say, there's a space. Okay, now, here's a first point. Just because you can say there's an intersection between Westerns and space movies isn't the same thing as writing the script of Star Wars. Okay? So this is what I would call, you know, a high-level concept. I'm going to do something that's kind of a cross of this and this, and the product is down here below that. But once I set that as an objective, I can say, all right, what kind of script would follow that? Well, I could imagine the setting, right? So you can do the same thing with your company story. And I'll explain this to you in a second. But you've got kind of an idea of the space by the intersections of a couple things. And below it, you come up with, well, what product would actually fit that story? What product would fit that space? All right? So let me keep going with this analogy a little bit more. The internet is a trend, and there used to be newspapers and media. Of course, that's Yahoo, right? It works great for companies, too. Flickr was a actual internet service, and video is becoming more popular. There you have the space for YouTube. Big data and China, two giant markets. What company is that? I have no idea. But I'll tell, I don't know that there is one. But my point is, if you wanted to go figure out an area for a company, that's a good place. I mean, just, it's like that simple, right? You take something that's going on, you find this intersection. Does that mean I know what the product is? No. I don't know what the product would be underneath that company. But I can find the space with some intersections. Here's another one. SMS is how people used to communicate. There was another trend of photos, you know, on cameras, and you take that and you add to it the fact that there's a whole, you know, sentiment about privacy and so forth. So you got something at the intersection. Could you guess what I'm referring to there? Snapchat. See? You got it, right? Okay. So the only trick here is if this already exists, then you don't want to do that. Okay? So you make these intersections, and you say, is anybody doing this? And if nobody's doing that, okay, now we can go forward. All right? Okay, so it's a high-level concept. It's not the product, but it's the starting point for how you build your story. Okay? Again, if you know nothing about big data in China, don't do this one, right? Your background and the world is changing, and a story, and this is where you start. This is the way to think about how you get an idea. This is one way, okay? All right. Now I'm going to tell you a second way. So I've got about 5 ways that I think are like good approaches to doing this. And by the way, I'm going to give you all these slides. You don't have to write anything down, right? And you don't have to use all of these. So if only one of these helps you come up with an idea, that's all you need. You don't need all. It's not like you have to memorize them or say, did I run through my list of all the different approaches? I just want to show you some different ways that people come to getting an idea. That was one of them. Okay? Here's another one. And the way this one works is that you see some change that's going on. Change is obviously, kind of fundamental to all these opportunities. So you see a change, and here's an example of a change. You notice that people are doing more internet shopping. They buy more things on the internet. And so one thought process that you might have is, I really should have started Amazon. Okay? That's not a helpful thought process. Once you observe the change, you can say, oh, it's too late. I'm too late. Internet shopping's a big deal. It's too bad I missed that. Another approach that you could take, though, is you can say, well, if there is some change going on, there's probably some other change that's just about to happen because of this change, right? Okay, so the observation here was, if people are buying things more over the internet, then, for example, you used to go and you used to buy a Nikon camera at a store, and now you can buy it at Amazon. It just comes to your door. The insight here is, well, if a customer has a question about that camera, before they used to go to the store and ask the person who sold it to them, how do I work this? Or I have this problem, or do I need a different lens? Or I don't know, whatever. They have questions about that camera. If you buy it over the internet, who do you ask this question to, right? So if you see this change, then you're thinking, well, there must be some other things changing. I wonder how they're handling the questions afterwards. So the thought was, if you're not going back to the store, then perhaps you're calling the manufacturer directly, right? So now this is a real situation. This is how a company called Right Now Technologies was started. And the guy who started it, his name is Greg Gianforte, and he was a speaker here I'm going to say like 4 or 5 years back, and he talked about this exact process, how he thought through this. And actually, if you want to see it, you could find it on our Richard Newton lecture series. Just go back and find the Greg Gianforte lecture. Anyway, so what he thought was, okay, if maybe they're going back and they're calling Nikon. Maybe they're calling the manufacturer since they can't call Amazon. And so he tested that idea. And so he called up a call center, like at Nikon. He called up Nikon and said, hi, listen, can I talk to your manager? Just right off the top. I want to just escalate up a little bit in the call center. I got a question. Do you guys have a lot more call volume this year than you had last year? How are things going over there? And the manager says, yeah, you won't believe it. we've been hiring like crazy. And the other thing is we used to answer calls in like 3 minutes. Now it's like 15 minutes, 20 minutes to answer a call. Immediately you got validation. What he thinks is going to be a trend, you can already see it. You can test it. So what did he do? He said, well, what if we were to make a website so that when you get one of these calls and there's kind of some common questions that people have, you could offload them to this website. And he said, you know, for $1,000, I'll start a website like this for you. Like it doesn't, not much money, right? And he tested with these customers whether that would actually be helpful. And some people it would, and some people it wouldn't. He actually wrote the code himself. He's created some early website for it. And over time, his technology got better and better. And at some point, what happened is that every time there was a question and the question was more commonly asked, those questions would come to the top of the list automatically on the website. It ended up being a database of information about that camera, behind it. So it got sophisticated. Eventually, they had 20 patents on all of the different ways that you can offload the, what the person at the call center would say at the website. And so that's basically this third point here. So he defined this opportunity not by seeing that there's a change going on, but then realizing it's too late to be on that change, but I can figure out what change this is about to create next and test it. I mean, you don't want a change that's going to happen in 10 years. You want a change that you can see that it's already happening right now, and you're just picking it up sooner, and you're validating it sooner before other people have seen this. And then, today we can all say, oh, that was a great business. It's too late. It's too late now on that one. But with every change, you can try to figure out what's the next change that's about to happen. All right, so that's my number 2. Number 3, connector models. So this is a guy who you can find on LinkedIn. He's mentioned in the book called Rainforest. He's a serial entrepreneur, Larry Bach. He started 40 companies. And the total market capitalization of 40 of these is like $40 billion. Incredibly successful, right? How do you start 40 companies? I mean, that just, if it takes you 2 years to get every company started, he should be like 100 years old, right? It doesn't seem reasonable that you can that quickly start 40 companies. The way that he does it is he looks around at things that are emerging, changing in the world, particularly in research areas, emerging new areas of discovery. He's actually in life science, so research life science areas, and what he does is he starts asking people, if I was going to start a company, who would be the 5 people that would be the best people to have in that company? And he knows nothing about it, by the way. He doesn't know about the area. He's just asking a question, who would those 5 people be? And people say, oh, here's a few people that I think would be good. Here's some other people that would be good for your company. Eventually, the same names start to pop up. You get the consensus. Everyone mentions this person, or everyone mentions that person. So he goes to these 5 people, and he says, I want to start a company, and I want you to be part of it, and I want this other person who's really famous to be part of it. And he tries to get them together. And once you get those 5 people together, 4 or 5 people, whatever the number is, he doesn't know what's the problem. He doesn't know what's the market positioning. He doesn't know who's the first customer. He doesn't know any of these things. But with these 5 people, one of them knows all these things. Somebody says, oh, you know what? I've already got a demo. Oh, I already know that customer. I know exactly how you would get to get your first customer. I think I know how you would communicate this. I could do the trial for you. If you have the right people, you save a lot of time, right? This is a connector model, right? So some of you are natural connectors. You know it if you are. And you can use techniques like this to get the right people together. The other thing is, even if you're not a connector, I just want to talk about team balance. it's really good to have someone who is a good connector on your team, because they can bring other resources that take so much time for you to develop, and they come together quickly. So it's another idea. 3, think about connector models as you're coming up with your idea. Number 4, just pick a target. Something you don't like, some company you don't like, just you think some organization is slow, you think they're antiquated, you think they're not run well, whatever it is. You can go back and you can look at case studies. There's a very famous case study of Mark Benioff, who started Salesforce. All he did was picked Siebel Systems as a target, developed a whole story around why that company was this giant gorilla that his little company was going to take down head on, that he was the underdog. They were this, they needed to go. They were the old model. And believe it or not, he pretty much took them down. I mean, he really did. And I had a student, here, it's a picture of her, Jessica Ma. She used to sit in my class and pretty much not paying attention to anything I was saying, I'm pretty sure. But she had 2 things in her mind. One was she was going to start a company. That was a goal of hers. She's going to start a company. She was going to be. She had a couple of these things in her mind. She was going to be the youngest of some category of person to graduate from Berkeley, so forth. She had some goals, and one thing she was going to start a company. All the time when she wasn't listening to me, she was basically writing code in class, and occasionally look over the laptop. The other thing that she would do is she just had a target. And rational, irrational, I don't know, but she just would say, I hate banks. Banks she just had something against banks. I don't know what. I don't know what happened in her childhood, but there was something about banks that bothered her. And she's like, that model's got to go. Even banks that I thought were like, oh, that's really good customer service. No, banks are just bad to her. And she built a story around that. And eventually she found her way to something that turned into a company. And she's got a company in De Niro. There's about 80 people that work there. It's in San Francisco today. For all I know, she's a partner with a bank the company could be doing something very helpful to banks now, but I don't know. But the point is, the starting point was just picking a target. And by the way, that's not only entrepreneurs. Private equity people do the same thing. They pick a target too. They just say, oh, here's an antiquated company. Of course, they want to buy it and make it efficient. Your goal from an entrepreneurial point of view is just to take it on. You just say, it could be done better. And you don't have to necessarily know the product right away or the method right away. But if you have a target, it focuses you. All right, so that's my number 4 one. OK. There's always this, number 5. You've got your own frustration with something. Anytime that you can translate that into customer insight, into market insight, that's fine. If you're irritated by something and you seem to have a good sense that other people are irritated by it, again, you have to match it with your own background and so forth. But if it just keeps bugging you, there must be a better way to do something. That's an approach. This is not the one I would start with. Okay, I just tell you, they're pretty much in the order that I would do it. I think those intersection ideas is by far the quickest way to find a target space, and then look at change and the derivatives of the change, and then look at the targets and connector models. But somewhere down the list there is this one. Maybe you just run into something that bugs you. And then my 6 and 7 are, if none of those work for you, at least spend time where the action's likely to be. So if you really care about robotics, don't spend time at TV watching, at home watching daytime soap operas. Okay, that's not going to help you. If something exciting is going to happen in robotics, it's not going to be there. Okay? So if there's a center where they're doing robotics, or there's people that meet that you think are very capable and they all get together there, spend time there. Spend time where you think something will happen. At least you'll be near it. And if you didn't have the idea, you'd be near it. And then you can have your own ideas, close to it. Otherwise, it's like oxygen. You're just cut off from it. You can't do anything if you're not hearing any of the information. And then 6 and 7 are related. The other thing is, if you're going to spend time near where activity is happening, also watch. Some people are a little bit more on the leading edge than other people. So if you don't think you're one of those people who is on the very edge of everything, you can at least be aware of who is. You start to notice that, like, oh, they always seem to be like trying this very latest thing, or they're a little bit, at the edge of what's about to happen. At least be aware of them and what they're doing, because that also gives you insight into what's going on. So these two are related. Spend time where things are happening, and watch the people around you and who seems to be kind of farther out in their thinking than everybody else. Okay? All right. So with this, I'm going to come back to where I started, which is there's this idea that you've got the environment is changing, the world's changing, you've got your skills, you're going to develop this story, and then we're going to move on to how do you execute and how do you actually build a company from this. If you are at the very, very beginning, then, and that means you might even have an idea, but it still needs some refinement and some validation, things like that, then you're likely to be in track 1. You're in the track, and we're going to have mentors that will be here that will help you form teams, improve your ideas, basically get started. And these ideas that I just talked about, before we get to the mentoring session, if you can find 20 minutes, run through one of these exercises. Either do the intersection exercise or think through the change exercise, or do one of these just to get yourself thinking about what some possible stories could be. So some things that might be interesting, all right? Now, if you're farther along with that, you've already kind of started your company, you're well on your way to a prototype, that type of thing. You're not ideating like, I wonder what I should do. You're farther along than that. Then we're going to have a separate session, and this is the track 2. And later on this afternoon, we're going to meet upstairs for that. And here, even though you're farther along, I think you could still do one of those ideation exercises and try refining your story a little bit even before you go up there. But if you are up there, okay, you should also be thinking about what thing you actually want to achieve given where you are now. Like, what would that next thing be? All right. One other thing, you hear this all the time. Ideas are worth very little. Execution is worth everything, right? If you haven't heard that, I'll just say it. Okay, done. All right. Okay. A lot of people have or I guess a lot of people used to have this misconception that you just wait around for this great idea, and as soon as you have the great idea, it just happens. And in reality, what it means is people have ideas all the time. It's what you do with it that makes the difference. And if there are, 5 of you that I start off 5 teams, and I start you all off with the same idea in the beginning, over the course of 3 weeks or over the course of a semester, you're going to take those ideas in different ways and to different lengths. So some people will take it just a little bit. Some people will take that idea much, much farther. Some people will adapt that idea and take it much farther. And that's really what the execution is. What can you do with it? And as different people with the same idea start working on these things, some people start to be executing farther than other people. And the world, they don't mean to be watching, but they are watching. And and people start to become aware that one particular group of people is making more progress than all the other people that are in that space. Like Facebook is making more progress than everybody else. There's like 20 social networking companies, but one of them started to become more aware, people are more aware of it than all the others. And as soon as people start to figure out this one is making more progress than the other ones, then everybody puts all their attention just on that one. And so all the money, all the customers, everything migrates to that one. So you don't really just have all the time in the world. Once you've got your idea, you've got to turn that story into a public awareness and a momentum story. You have to build a story that people are, oh, that's the group that's making success. That is where the winner's likely to be. As soon as people come to the conclusion that's where the winner's likely to be, that will be the winner. It will self-fulfill at that point. So anyway, that's part of what execution is. But so we're going to break these into two, track 1 and track 2. Execution is really important. Okay, so I'll just leave you on this one slide, which is track 1. You're probably working on your idea. It's a natural starting point. If you're somewhere else, maybe spend a minute, look at this, and think, what could you be working on? What do you want to achieve out of the rest of this? And that's what we're going to do for, in the next few days with the mentors and so forth. All right? I'll just leave this slide up now. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, you're, okay.
The microphone.
Yeah, you're, okay, you don't have a question. He's got the microphone. All right. Yeah.
Will the track 2, if we're in track 1, will track 2 PowerPoints at least be available, or even a video of what is discussed be available?
Yeah, what we're going to do, so the question was, if you're in track 1, will you get to see what's going on in track 2? And so what we're going to do is, on the last day, we're going to take some samples of people who started with nothing, and we're going to see how far along they came with their idea. We'll take a couple samples of people who were farther along, and we'll see what they chose as what to work on, and then they'll share it with everybody, and then we can have a whole discussion around, well, maybe you could have done this, or you could see what kind of issues or limitations they're running up against. But yeah, I don't think we're not going to make everybody's work available to everybody. It won't be like that. It's not helpful even to the teams, to do that. But we will take some good examples and use them as live cases here. Okay. All right. Can I at least get some validation that you did find this insightful? There is something, right?
Hey, if you did, you can tweet. #BMOE 2015.
Okay. Any other question? I think so. You know what we're doing. You got the basic idea. You got enough to get started, right? Okay. Why don't we take a little break until then our next section starts.